I hear.
But I'll go ahead and get started with some introductions. My name is Erin Mickles. First, let me start off with just the webinar. This webinar will be talking about interviewing at the placement exchange, primarily before, during, and slightly some pieces after the interview process.
All right, good morning, folks. My name is Tim Layson. I serve as the Associate Director of Residence Life at Santa Clara University in Santa Clara, California. It's great to be on here with you all and talk about interviewing.
And I'm Erin Mickles, and I serve as the Associate Director for Recruitment and Staff Development at Loyola University, Maryland. And I also serve as the Chair for the Employer Development Committee. And if you aren't sure what the Employer Development Committee does within TPE, we're a small subset of the larger Placement Exchange Committee that plans the placement conference on-site and some of the initiatives outside of on-site. And our specific team works with employers both during, before, and after in TPE, just to make your experience the best that we can and make sure that you're getting out of TPE exactly what you want, which is hopefully hiring good candidates and having a smooth process. We have one more person on here who, Kirsten is still here, who I will allow to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on which time zone you are on. I am Kirsten Fox. I am the Director of TPE of the Placement Exchange. So I have the good fortune of getting to work with our wonderful volunteers who lead our employer development team and the rest of the on-site committee as well. You will probably start receiving many more emails from TPE also between now and the on-site event. So just know that obviously Ariane and Tim are great resources, and I can be an additional resource to you as well. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Kirsten. All right, so we just really wanted to start with some upcoming dates that are imperative to the TPE process, especially as employers. You can, if you've already registered, you can begin scheduling interviews this Saturday, so February 1st. That's also the same time that you want to start uploading your interview team. One thing to note about your interview teams, everyone that is going to be at TPE, you need to ensure that they are part of your interview team so that we can make name tags and everything for them. Also, if the person who set up your employer profile is also going, they will also need to be put in as a member of the interview team. The system won't automatically make them a member of the interview team. And so sometimes what happens is employers will assume that. And when you get to on-site, they won't have a name tag because we technically see their name when we put our reports. So make sure that you are adding the individual who created your account as an interview team member. They will be there. Sometimes we know that employers who set that account up aren't actually attending. And so we just want to clarify that. Any ADA requests for interview halls should be submitted by February 14th. And then any service orders that you have for the interview hall need to be submitted by February 21st. And then, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so just to give you all some upcoming dates for our next set of ED Live series, the flyer that's on the left is just an overview of all the dates of our different ED Live series that we'll be hosting this spring. And then the flyer on the right, or my right-hand side, could be different for you all. That is the next session that we'll be talking about on February 10th. So socials at TPE, obviously a little bit more about interviewing as well. Should you have any other need any other information. And if you haven't been able to join us for any of our other ED Live sessions, please visit our YouTube page for all of our prior ED Live sessions, including candidate sessions. It's the Placement Exchange YouTube page, so you can see what messages have gone out to candidates and what information they're receiving as well. It's a pretty great resource if you need to review anything.
So just a few things that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about scheduling interviews, both the logistics as it relates to TPE and preparing for when the site goes live this Saturday, but also talking about scheduling interviews as it relates to how you're doing them in your process. Some folks will schedule first and second rounds and even third rounds, all to take place at onsite. Some will do some of those interviews beforehand. So we'll talk about that process. We'll also talk about some helpful interview logistics, whether that's how you're going to grab the candidate, how you're going to pick them up from the workroom or the waiting room, how you're going to receive thank you notes if you want to receive thank you notes. So we'll discuss that. We'll talk about candidate communications through your hiring process. And then we'll talk about specifically changes that may happen as it relates to interviewing at TPE Onsite.
Great. So I have the pleasure of talking about the logistical parts of interviewing at TPE Onsite. So for those of you who are potentially brand new or haven't been to TPE in a little while, the interview scheduling begins on February 1st. So that's kind of the next big key date that you'll see as a theme throughout the rest of our presentation today. We do make a recommendation that you schedule interviews prior to arriving on site and leaving room in your team schedule if you do second rounds or just timing in general. Part of the reason why, and I outline that, is because it allows you to potentially screen candidates with an institution and organization's process. So depending on how you're structuring your interview experience, this allows you to kind of see what candidates are there. And also we want to make sure that we leave room for any candidates who are scheduling, who may not come with pre-scheduled, who may not have a pre-schedule prior to arriving to TPE, the time to meet with you all as well. This will also help you prepare an approximate number of promotional items that you may want to bring with you, and also help you with packing, obviously. And also just helps with your overall team in developing the overall schedule. But we also want to make sure, like I said again, that we leave some time for those candidates who don't pre-schedule interviews, because we will have a good number of them that may not have as many pre-scheduled interviews or potentially no scheduled interviews. So making sure to leave some room in your schedule, but that's also dictated by your HR process as well.
And we often also have candidates, once you get to onsite, the Employer Development Team will have a list of candidates who have less than 10 interviews scheduled. So if you do also have space and you want to check on, because some of those candidates, some don't register until the week of TPE, including even down to the day before, and so they don't come with a lot of interviews. We will gather those folks so that you're able to check in and see who they are. We also are doing a new initiative this year on the Wednesday. We're hosting a first look networking and job fair. And so employers will be able to kind of have a meet and greet with all of our candidates that are around on Wednesday before the interview hall officially opens on Thursday morning.
Thank you, Arian. So interview schedule with the team. Employers can upload their interview teams beginning February 1st. And I know Arian alluded to this, but the interview team that you place into the TPE website as an employer, the people that you list are the folks that we are expecting to see when you all come on site in Austin this year. So if you are having like an administrative support person or an additional person who's handling the TPE account and they are not attending the TPE experience, like please make sure that you don't list them on their interview team, because we do print name tags for every single person. And like I said, if you've never been to TPE before, the name tags help us identify, one, whether you're a candidate or employer, but it's also your access point into the interview hall and to all of our candidate and employer workspaces. So we want to make sure the name tags that you want, or the names that you put in, reflect who's supposed to be on your team. And so just to put that out there again, making sure that you're putting in those folks who are actually attending the on-site experience with you all. And if you need help with that, we're more than happy to troubleshoot that with you, and we'll talk about ways you can connect with us after our ED live session today, just so that we can get any other questions answered. I would say another big thing about your overall interview schedule is building in travel time and break times. So depending on whether or not, and I would say more so for travel time too, but especially for institutions who are booking hotels or lodging that aren't necessarily like adjacent or near the Austin Convention Center, you'll want to make sure you build in some travel time into your overall schedule. It may not be reflected into your TPE schedule, but something you'll want to account for. So I'll give you an example of when I served on my first institutional recruitment team in 2011 in Philadelphia. And the hotel that I ended up staying at was about 8.5 blocks away. And our associate director who was booking our team or booking our time scheduled interviews to begin at 8:30 in the morning. And so it was a very early morning every single day to make sure that I was there before 8:15 and ready to go for the day. So making sure that as you're building your schedule, you're building in some of that time as well. And also meal times. Please take lunch. We tell this to all candidates. We also tell this to all employers. Please make sure you're building in meal times into your schedule. And depending on how many people are on your team or how many tables you have, that will look a little bit different. But please make sure that you are building in meal time and sustaining yourself throughout the experience, because we want to make sure that that no one goes hangry during that time frame. And so we just want to make sure that you're also just building in some of those break times as well, because it is a very, very long day for you all. You will be inside. You'll be inside looking relatively at the same space and area. So you want to make sure you build in some bio break times or meal times, or really just time to maybe walk outside, get some fresh air, and then come on back in. So that overall schedule is really important to make sure that you're accounting for travel time and meal times for all of your group, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page about that. So interview table logistics. So when you as an employer applied or registered for TPE, you were asked to coordinate a number of tables, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 or more. So just to give everyone the perspective, interview blocks are in 30 or 60-minute increments. So if you're doing a 45, I put the example here. If you're scheduling a 45-minute interview, please tell the candidate that when you block on their schedule or when they have to block their own schedule, that you're going to block for an hour. Our system, it doesn't go by 15-minute increments, it's 30 or 60. And if you're doing a longer interview, if you're doing a 90-minute first round interview, which more power to you, then you'll want to make sure you adjust your time accordingly. And so just to give everyone that perspective, because again, if you've never been to TPE or it's been quite some time, this will also be important in how you build the overall schedule. So interview tables, employers will be assigned specific table numbers for your institution. So if you bought one table, then you'll have one table number. If you've bought multiple tables, you'll have multiple table numbers. If you have bought multiple tables or just in general, make sure that when a candidate signs up or you're signing up a candidate for an interview, that you are assigning them to the right table, especially for those institutions that have purchased more than 2 tables. If you want to make sure they meet with Team A at this time, and if they do well enough in their first interview, you want to do a second round with them for another 30 minutes. You want to have them meet with Team B. It'll be important to ensure that they are meeting with the right people at the right time. And so making sure that you are assigning the right interview to the right table, because can't tell you how many times I've done that as an employer, like, ooh, sorry, you're actually with me, you're with them, so we're going to switch really quick. Please don't judge us. And it happens. If you end up assigning a candidate to a wrong table within your institutional interview tables, that's okay. Try to laugh it off or try to make a joke of it, but it'll happen. But that's why we want to make sure that you're reminded of that. You will need to bring your own tablecloths. So the items that we kind of provide on the table are a digital clock person. If you've never seen them, they're just a little blue person and their face is a clock. So it's pretty simple. And then obviously the table number. In the interview hall, if you've never done this or it's been a time, we will have a map for you all in our employer lounge to show you where all the different table numberings are at. And there will also be like street signs that you all can see that say table numbers 1 through 88, 100 through 188 are this way. Tables number 500 and so on are this way. And again, if you are a first-time employer to TPE, we can also walk through this with you. And you'll also have some time on that Wednesday to kind of look through and see what the interview hall looks like. But as far as promotional items for your institution, you all will need to provide that for yourself. And as an employer, make sure you bring a tablecloth so you're not running out to Michael's and buying one at the last minute. Definitely have done that before. So just making sure, we just want to make sure that you know what's given to you. We will also have what's called solution stations within the interview hall. So should you forget, should you need an additional clock, we'll also have some mints there. We will have a limited supply of pens. Pens are obviously a hot commodity during TPE. So we'll have a limited supply of basic office essentials that you'll need for your table, but should you need something, feel free to come to the solutions table and we can try to troubleshoot with you as to what we have available. Erin, is there anything you want to add or any questions that have come up?
No questions have come up yet. I did want to share that for those who haven't seen the interview scheduling system, if you may have gone to TPE before but not been the one scheduling, one of the views is that you actually will view your interview schedule by the table. And so you'll have 3 different screens that are by table. So also being cognizant of that. So if you're scheduling lunch, you want to schedule a lunch on all 3 screens, because what it'll mean is that if a candidate wants to schedule an interview and you didn't give a specific time, someone could schedule a interview during your lunch break at one of the tables that you may not have blocked off. So it'll be good to be cognizant of each schedule, but also, like Tim said, if you want someone to come back for a 2nd round or a 3rd round interview with a different team, and if your team is set up by the table, you want to ensure that you also put them on your calendar or the table to set up an interview with the correct table, because that can sometimes cause a candidate to be confused or your team to even be confused if they're getting multiple candidates kind of on their calendar. It can also confuse our team when they try to go in and schedule your candidate and that table is already blocked. We will always come back and ask you before putting them at another table if you would like them at one of your other tables, if you have more than one.
Okay. There was a question in our question chat. They asked, can you please have those working with the scheduling center read the table numbers we are offering 2nd round interviews at, because we want them to see different professionals rather than interviewing with the same team a 2nd time. Yes, we can work with our scheduling center to make sure that happens. But as an employer, you will also have the ability to let them know that you want them to schedule an interview with table number blah, blah, blah. And yeah, you will have the ability to tell them to schedule an interview with a specific table. Should you be doing 2nd rounds at TPE? I don't want to assume that everyone does 2nd rounds at TPE because everyone's interview process is a little bit different. But yes, thank you so much for submitting that, and we will definitely work with our scheduling center to make sure that they are being cognizant of that. So interview scheduling with candidates. The biggest thing that we hear from candidates is just communication about an overall process. So be sure to inform your candidates the length of time for your interviews, because as someone who was a former candidate, the way I prepared for a first round 30-minute interview was completely different than the way I prepared for a one-time 45-minute interview with an institution. Not that I didn't do the same level of research or anything like that, but just from my mind as a candidate, like, this was like my only, this could be my only time that I could sit with people formally in a one-time 45-minute interview. And so informing them of what your process will look like will be really, really helpful, because that is one thing we hear from our candidates, that like they would have liked some information regarding regarding how long their interview would be with the institution at TPE. And so the other thing is that candidates are not able to see employer schedules and will not be aware of open time blocks. So if you are interested in a candidate scheduling an interview with you, then you will want to reach out to that candidate and say, like, dear Timothy Layson, here at the University of so-and-so, we are interested in scheduling a 30-minute first-round interview with you. Please go to the table and do so. And so we're also coaching candidates on how to handle those things when employers do it. But if you are interested in the candidate, you as an employer can also reach out to them and say, like, we'd like to schedule an interview with you on site. Because as a former candidate, there were a number of interviews that I was able to get that I didn't pre-schedule. And actually, that's how I ended up taking my first job, was based on an invite to an institution. And it was wonderful. And obviously I worked there for a while. So you just never know sometimes. The other thing that we want to make sure we let our employers know is be clear with candidates regarding your thank you preferences. If you are an institution that is very highly valued or values highly sustainability, please let candidates know in some way that you prefer emails versus thank you cards. You would not believe the amount of thank you cards that get put into mailboxes and all of those things. We've even seen candidates come with small gifts for employers, which I'm like, thank you. I love chocolate. However, I can't necessarily pack that back up in our institutional baggage when we've already pre-weighted everything, because I'm very specific like that. So making sure you let candidates know like what your actual thank you preferences are would be really, really helpful. Now, you will still probably get cards and all of those things. We can't stop that from happening, but if we could let our employers know that as they're communicating with candidates that this is your preferred method of saying thank you to us. I know that people think that emails are a little informal or impersonal, but it's like I can carry an email on my phone versus like carrying 10 cards that I got from different candidates. So yeah, please make sure you let candidates know your thank you preferences. And if you're interested in the candidate, feel free to reach out to them.
I would also add some different pieces when it comes to scheduling of our candidates. One is that some candidates have also mentioned employer scheduling without letting them know. And so just throwing things on their calendar. And so it's also good to, even if it's before on-site, during this TPE scheduling period between this Saturday and next, and in March, is to email them and just confirm, will this time work for you? So that they can confirm, yes, it will. Because I think some of our candidates also forget, same as we've told you, is to schedule some break time. Sometimes candidates don't schedule a break time. And being that this is a job search, for some of them it's the first major job search, they're afraid to tell an employer no. So we've had candidates who have scheduled 40 and 50 interviews in a 3-day span, no lunches, no breaks, no breakfast, because they're afraid to say no to a employer. So at least allowing them the opportunity to say, unfortunately, I don't have that time available. Can we do another time? Versus the other piece that may happen is that you put something on his candidate schedule and they either don't show up or they cancel it without saying anything to you. So we see both sides of the coin. We see candidates who will just cancel without saying anything. They'll kind of ghost the employer, or we'll see candidates who will take on as many interviews as they get because they weren't able to say, I'm not available at that time. The
That's
other
also
thing
a good point.
go ahead, Tim.
That's also a really good point. In your communications with candidates, if you're giving them like blocks of time to select from, let them know that how you're doing that. So if someone signs up to interview with you at 2:30, letting that candidate know, like, thank you for telling us that you want to interview with us at 2:30. We will go ahead and plug you into our schedule, because that's also very helpful from a candidate perspective, that employers are willing to do that.
And it's perfectly okay to also give the candidates a deadline. So if you email them on Friday and you want to schedule them and you say, we need your notice by next Tuesday, if they don't let you know by next Tuesday, then because we know a lot of candidates you're probably looking to interview, then let them know that they've missed that deadline. You can work with them if there is availability, and you still want to interview them, but I don't want you to hold up your other candidates also that you may be waiting. So it's perfectly okay to also give the candidates a specific deadline of when to let you know their availability. Another thing I would say is with the thank you things, it goes the other way too from our employers. The candidate mailboxes are also only so big, and they're not giant. So when employers give candidates things like blankets, that takes not only that candidate's mailbox, it either won't fit in their mailbox, or if we try to stuff it in there, it's gonna squish the candidate's mailbox above theirs and underneath theirs. And so also being cognizant of the size of your gifts and how you're giving, or swag items and giving those to candidates, are those things, if they're larger than the mailbox, something you can give to them at the table once they leave their second round or third round interview, or even their first round if you want to give it to them. So thinking about those aspects too of what swag items you're bringing and will they fit in the mailboxes.
The mailboxes for both candidates and employers are the size of a ream of paper. So if you take like a full ream of paper, that is the size. It's a little bit bigger, but that is the approximate size of everyone's mailbox. So as you can imagine, especially for employers like who are getting multiple requests for potential interviews, or you all are reaching out to people, like the mailboxes fill up very, very quickly. And so we want to be cognizant of that as well. So some helpful hints. You can start, like I said, you can start submitting interview teams beginning February 1st, 2020. List all the members of the interview team who will be at the onsite. Pre-schedule some interviews if you're able to prior to onsite. It'll make your team's life a little bit more manageable when you get there. Schedule meal and break times for your interview tables. Cannot stress that again. Self-wellness is a really big thing during this process, not just for our candidates, but also for our employers, because you run out of voice time as well. Make sure you're scheduling interviews for the correct interview tables. Again, employers are given specific interview tables for depending on the number they've bought or they've purchased. So making sure that you're scheduling candidates for your correct interview tables at the correct time. And then being clear on your thank you preferences with candidates, just so that way they can know how to best say thank you for taking the time to meet with them.
All right, so one thing that is also important to think about now that you're scheduling your interviews, if you haven't already, it's also thinking about your specific interview questions. With that comes, like Tim mentioned earlier, just your process for interviewing in general. So are you hosting all of your first round, second rounds at TPE Onsite? Or are you doing some, we have a lot of institutions who have changed to doing first round interviews all before they get to onsite, and then onsite is just for second round interviews. We also have some institutions that do only second rounds and third rounds on site, and third rounds for most of those institutions are on-campus offers, and so they do those in person. If you are going to do on-campus offers at TPE Onsite, it's just thinking about when you're offering those. Are you offering them at the table? Are you doing them in letter format? We've had some institutions before go into the candidate workroom and offer on campuses. We highly would discourage that because employers are not allowed in the candidate workroom. So that one is not really an option. But when you're thinking about your interview questions, really want to talk to your team. What we suggest is clearly defining what it is that you're looking for in a candidate. We have often talked to employers where the entire team has a different idea of what they're looking for in a candidate with no guidance on what is our team as a whole or our department as a whole looking for in a candidate. And so that will help you. One, let's just get on one accord about who are we looking to hire at a base level. Then from there, having that conversation with your team on, so what questions will get us there, will get us to finding out if this candidate is what we're looking for. We also suggest avoiding rogue questions. And so having a conversation with your team, I know I've led teams where I've had my own team members kind of go rogue with questions, and then we get into a whole HR policy thing of you can't really go off the script of what the questions are, because then the candidates aren't all getting an equitable experience. Then there's also thinking about the question types that you have. Something unique that we've seen pop up in the past few years when it comes to TPE is we've seen a lot of schools do case study type questions where they give an example using a picture of some sort and actually have the candidate solve a problem. It's something that some schools will do at their on campuses, but we've seen a lot of schools first bring that out at the TPE Onsite. And that also comes with question styles. We've seen the behavioral-based interview questions. We've seen our standard interview questions. So it's really determining before you get to TPE Onsite, and even before you just start your interview phase, if you're not there yet, what are your questions types and how can we formulate those standard questions that we will ask every candidate. Then we just suggest personalizing your questions specific to the role, to your department, and to your institution. So Tim and I both work at Jesuit institutions, and so we always have questions on our interviews related to working with the Jesuit values and the Jesuit mission. And so that also helps your candidate kind of gauge your institution and learn more about it. We all expect our candidates to do research on our institutions, but there also is an extent of I can read something on the internet versus understanding what it is. So also giving you as the employer's time to give more insight to your institution, to the candidate through the questions that you're asking. And then outside of that, once you have your questions set, the other part is just preparing your recruitment team for on-site. It's not often that institutions are doing a TPE on-site experience. We know some institutions do a practice placement exchanges, but some institutions have never been to something like the placement exchange. And so you really want to have a sit down with your team, and as we talked about before, have a discussion on what experience through recruitment are we trying to create. We talked about what we're looking for in a candidate, but now what experience do we want to create? Those of us who work with recruitment and selection know that recruitment is an experience. You're giving your candidates the experience that is your institution. All of us who have been through recruitment processes probably can talk about our best and our worst experience going through recruitment at all levels. And so what are you trying to offer your candidates? What do you want them to leave with? And go tell their friends and go tell other folks who are like, I'm interested in this institution. What do you want them to tell about your process? It's also thinking about how teaching your team or talking to them about how to actually interview. Some tips that we've talked about before from employer development is we've seen employers who, and also talk to candidates who felt like there are the employers who are very stern throughout the entire interview, and so they terrify them, or the employers who are very nice throughout the interview. So it kind of gives them the piece of like, oh, they love me, it's great. And then we have candidates in our candidate workroom who are like, well, I thought they loved me. They smiled the whole time and they nodded at every one of my questions. And then I got this thanks but no thanks letter. And so having a conversation with your team about how to actually interview a candidate, how are you presenting in the interview, and how that can come off, especially knowing that some of these candidates, it's their first time really having this type of interview. We also suggest working with your human resources team on implicit bias training. Some departments do that in-house, others will pull in their human resources team, but it is a good conversation to have, especially when meeting with so many different individuals at the placement exchange, and making sure your team is aware. The other one is also different pitfalls of interviewing that could take place. Things like favoritism that could happen, the halo effect, really looking into those. And it may also still be good to work with your HR team to have that conversation of these are some pitfalls that subconsciously you could fall into when interviewing. And so it really is good to have a conversation on, let's talk about certain pitfalls that could take place in interviewing so that we can catch them before they take place. Or, you know, the different effects of like a candidate says one thing that's great and it kind of overshadows everything else of their interview, and it's not really being looked at closely. The other thing to prepare your recruitment team for is that TPE, outside of being just a recruitment conference for you to find good candidates to find jobs, it's a great networking event. And a lot of folks who have been employers at TPE have connected with other employers who become their future employers. And so while you're there looking for current colleagues, you also may bump into your next colleague. And so I definitely suggest making sure your team is aware of that. Yeah, so the halo effect really relates to kind of that example I just gave of when you take one thing and they say something great that really relates. So let's say, for example, I'll use, I'm recruiting. I'm really passionate about recruitment and selection. And so a candidate could say something about also being passionate about recruitment and selection. And from that moment on, I see the angel halo, and I'm like, this candidate is amazing, they're great. And I hear nothing else that they're saying. Like, I'm hearing it, but I'm not truly hearing it. And even my colleague can write something and be like, well, they kind of said this statement that was problematic. And I'm like, but they love recruitment and selection. So that's where that halo effect can come in, is that something a candidate says overshadows anything else that they're saying. And so you automatically want that candidate, and just being cognizant of that in an interview process. There's also the reverse effect of the halo, where they could say one thing that you don't necessarily agree with, and automatically everything else they say is wrong. And so you automatically write off a candidate because of something they said, or something that you saw, or even to the point of like being in an elevator and they mentioned something about a school that you may have worked at, and then all of a sudden you're writing that candidate off. So those are pieces of the halo effect that could take place. When it, another thing to prepare your team for, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, is to prepare your team for that first look job fair networking event that we're doing. And so for our institutions that are arriving on Wednesday night, we'll be doing kind of a mini job fair, similar to what career fairs look like at different institutions, and that employers, while you're setting up your table, or if you've already have it set up, will allow our candidates in to kind of roam and network with the institutions who are there. This is a good way to catch our candidates who have either applied late, haven't really started applying to jobs or anything, or have low numbers of interviews, really to connect with our employers. But also, especially for our schools that are smaller, who you may not be known very well across the US, really getting your information out to some of our candidates. But also our unique jobs, we have some institutions that are not universities, but more so nonprofits that are also at TPE, to also get the word out about your area. And then we have a question. As an employer, bringing your own personal CV or resume and meeting future colleagues. I'm trying to see if the question is asking about current employers bringing their own resumes to network, like they're not job searching. So I think we have different opinions on this as it relates from a TPE standpoint, being that it is for the candidates. However, being that it's also a networking event, I think offline on the side, I feel like you all can network as well when it comes to other employers. But Tim, I don't know if you have a different opinion, or Kirsten.
I responded in the group in the chat. Really, the first look Wednesday is really just set up to be like a networking and career fair type of event. It's really a networking event for our candidates. Like sometimes like just take off the edge of like being there and like containing their excitement and like all those things, because this will give the candidates a time to like see the interview hall for the very first time. Because as an employer, like as soon as you check in with us, you're just going straight to your table, setting up, and then maybe going to get dinner or like lunch, or depending on how early you're getting there. So we really want to take it as a time, as like it's more of a meet and greet than it is like a formalized type of time. And so that's just the way that that I'm seeing it. But if you have questions about it, feel free to connect with us either privately on the group chat or keep asking your questions, or during what we call concierge hours, should you have any other questions about that. But we will also circle around back around that to ensure that like employers and candidates are like kind of all, we all know, like we all understand like the purpose, because it really is just a meet and greet. for candidates and employers to get to know one another.
I would also say if you're talking about outside of that meet and greet time, about TPE as a whole being a networking experience, I would ask you to put yourself also in the shoes of, like, you're an employer and another employer comes to you with their resume while you're searching for a current position. And so you may be able to get by with that experience, but you also may be like, I'm currently searching for a different role, don't really know this person, and they're bringing me their resume on the side. So it's really about the experience you want to create with others. I think some folks, when it comes to TPE being a networking experience, it's you're meeting people, you're connecting with people. So then later down the line, when they have a position or a different position that you may be looking into, they may reach out to you and say, hey, I remember talking to you at TPE and you had interest in this area. I have a position opening. And so I don't think there's a negative to doing either way. If you do have resumes and you're chatting with someone and they talk about a different position that may be opening and you want to share your resume with them, I think that is fine. But I think it's also acknowledging that different employers may feel any type of way about receiving a resume for someone who's not applying to a certain position that they're currently recruiting for. So I think every employer is different. Some will be open to it and some may not, depending on the timing. But that all comes back to the networking piece of how you're networking with individuals. I would also remember to reiterate that to your recruitment team is that you are technically always on at TPE. So being cognizant of also the conversations your team is having. We have unfortunately had times where we've seen employers or been around employers who have discussed candidates in the vicinity of other candidates, but not realizing that those candidates know other candidates. And so we've heard a range of things. Or, for example, also talking at your tables. Some employers, after an interview, if a candidate leaves, you're able to talk at your table. But don't forget that there are other tables next to you, and then there's also staff who are working. And so we've heard a range of things, both positive and negative. And so it's being cognizant of that, the fact that you're always on anywhere in the vicinity of TPE, including nearby restaurants and such, because you never know who is a candidate or who is another employer if they don't have their name tags on. So really make sure you have that conversation with your team also to be cognizant of that. So something we've also been mentioning on and off is candidate communications. And we've said this in every Ed Live that we've done so far. Our biggest feedback for the past few years from candidates has been communication, both before, during, and after TPE about what is happening. I know for Tim and I in talking, we are still getting thanks but no thanks emails from jobs we applied to when we were grad students 5 and 6 years ago. And so it's the anxiety that is produced from, like, I applied to this job and now I'm hearing nothing back. And so something we have suggested is while you're developing your timeline for your process, also develop a communication timeline of when are we going to communicate with our candidates. Sometimes that is often left out. We also understand that sometimes human resources departments tell you when you can and cannot communicate with candidates. Even this is good enough to get out in the beginning to your candidates. So for example, you'll see on the screen, there's an example of the communication timeline that I send our candidates whenever I'm running a search process. As soon as a candidate applies, they'll receive this email just to acknowledge their application, and then it tells them every step of the process with specific dates from that point forward. Some schools can do this, some can't, but the more communication you can give a candidate, the better their experience and the better the process, both for them and for you, because it keeps you as the employer on a timeline. And if changes are made, it's good to still communicate that with the candidate. So whatever your process looks like, if you're doing first rounds, then second rounds, however, making sure you have a deadline or a timing of when you're going to have that and getting that to the candidate, so that no matter when you remove a candidate from a process, add them to a process, they are hearing something, so they know when they should hear back. It kind of helps to ease the anxiety for the candidates as well. So we suggest put yourself in the candidate's shoes. When you've been in search processes and the ones that you felt were better, was it the communication that helped in that process? That also includes on-site communications. And so when you're on site, there are mailboxes both for you and the candidate. Candidates, you're gonna have to reach out to them to let them know when you want to interview them, and we'll have slips on site that you can schedule interviews if you want to schedule a candidate interview for someone who's there. Some schools also bring their own information. We just ask that if you're going to make your own invite to an interview card, that you ask us what to put on the card so it matches what our team also shares. Because when some schools create things and they don't put a certain, like the table number on there, but they put the post number, that doesn't help our team to schedule the interview for you because we do it by the table numbers. Another piece is like, let's say you're canceling an interview. That's also a communication that you want to have with the candidate at onsite. So before you get to onsite, a lot of things are done electronically. Once you get onsite, everything is done really through our team and then the papers that you'll put in the candidate's mailbox. So if you're canceling an interview, you really want to make sure that you're getting that also to the candidate at onsite. And then at onsite, letting candidates know what's the next step. So after they interview with you, maybe for a first round, maybe for a second round, when are they going to hear from you again? Are they going to hear onsite? Are they going to hear after onsite? And then there's also the piece of your thanks but no thanks emails or letters. Understanding it is a hefty process to be at TPE Onsite and doing 10 to 40 interviews in a span of 3 days. So we do also get a lot of candidates where we're not saying not to send your thanks but no thanks letters. The candidates understand whether, we're no longer interested in interviewing you. It's just determining with you as a team if that's what you want to do at onsite or if you want to send all of those things post onsite. But these are conversations you really want to have with your team to figure out, are we doing that? When are we doing that? Because remembering that you're also going to see these candidates, continuing to see them throughout TPE, which it's fine if that's how your process is working. It's just making sure that you all have that conversation now before you get to TPE Onsite, rather than trying to decide there, like, oh, we're going to send this letter that says the things but no things. Are we going to send this letter inviting them to a next round or an on-campus? It's also trying to determine when you're going to do your on-campus offerings. Some of our institutions do them on-site. Some wait until post-NASPA to allow the candidates to really get NASPA and wait. And sometimes they call during NASPA. It just depends on what your timeline is. But again, going back to communication, the more your candidates know about your timeline, the more they'll be prepared or ready to hear back from you. Anything else you want to add, Tim?
I would just say, like, the communication part of it is also, like I think we've stated it a lot, is really, really important. And especially if anything changes in your timeline. As a candidate, I have been in processes before where an email like the one that Arian has screenshotted has been given to me, and then the institution had a freeze in hiring. And so that obviously delayed their timeline. And obviously the institution didn't tell me that they had a freeze in hiring. I figured it out myself. And so just letting them know, like, hey, this is our initial timeline. However, we've had to make some adjustments. So here's the new timeline, obviously with the candidates who you're interested with, but just letting them know that too, because it just helps keep your process transparent. I think that sometimes some of the feedback that we'll read from candidates that like employer processes aren't always as transparent as they would like it to see. And a lot of that is dictated through your human resources rules and your rules and policies on that. But if you're able to give at least, we're doing interviews at TPE, here's the next time you're going to hear from us, that is so much better than like doing the interview and then not hearing for weeks and then being invited on campus. So it is a courtesy, but it's also just like really good practice for us as employers to ensure that like we want to make sure that our candidates know where they stand in our process, because they also have to make other decisions for themselves too as to which on campuses they are choosing based on flights, based on travel, and all of those things. Like they have to make those decisions as well. And so anything we can do as employers to like really provide that level of assistance would be so much greater to the overall experience within your process.
So what we like to do with all of our Ed Lives is leave you with some things to think about for the upcoming month. And so one is, February 1st, the on-site team process open. So really updating your on-site team, furthering your candidate communication plan. Right now, you should be thinking about on-site communications and then post on-site communications. And so how are you communicating with candidates after after on-site? Any recruitment budget you may need, thinking about those sweat you want to bring, any print you want to bring, make you printing near the interview site, FedEx, places, the interview questions that you're bringing, candidate resumes if you're printing those. Thinking about your first round interviews, are you going to do them before TPE? Are you going to do them on site at TPE? Updating your interview questions. And then also, are there any campus partners that you want to start thinking now, who you want to involve in your on-campus process? A lot of institutions will start planning the weeks or days that they want to host on campuses now, just so they can start asking those on-campus partners to be in those interviews. Because as we all know, working in higher ed, it gets busier as the semester goes on, especially in the spring. So by the time we're asking our on-campus partners to come to our interviews, they're busy, they're booked up, when we could at least place a hold on their calendars now. It's always better to get a hold on there now and then cancel later, rather than having to scurry at the last minute to bring in an on-campus partner to help with those interviews.
Some upcoming dates, like we've said, this was at the beginning of the presentation as well, but interview scheduling opens this Saturday. So if you are really on top of it, you want to go ahead and do some scheduling blocks, please do so. You can also start adding your interview teams through your TPE registration website. If you or any of your teams have any specific ADA requests, February 14th is the deadline for those. And if you are doing any sort of shipment, because we do offer shipping and receiving services at a fee for institutions to have things brought to their table. And it also just depends on what you're bringing with you. If the things that you're bringing with you fit in the suitcase, then great. There were years where we had to bring several pop-ups for my institution, and there was no way I was carrying that on the airplane or trying to fit it into a large duffel bag. So thinking about that as well. And then thinking about what is next. There was a question of, do you know when will those shipping details be added to the TPE website? We will get that question answered for you. And then there was a question before, how do we set up socials? Is it different than interview service? Yes. If you are looking at setting up a social, it is part of the registration of when you initially register. So if whoever asked that question, if you need specific assistance with that, please let us know, and we'll try to work with you in getting the social set up should you want that, because you can set up a social time through the registration website at TPE. So then that way your social is within the convention center, and there's specific days and times that folks will be able to select. It also just depends on what our current level of availability is. But yes, you do set up socials separately from the interview hall service orders. Yeah, great questions. We will make sure to get the shipping details somewhere on our website, or at least make them a little bit more clear. And we'll work with our team to do that. But speaking of socials, our next ED Live is actually focusing on socials at TPE. We'll also talk a little bit more about interviewing as well, to catch any other questions, but also just show you some different things that we were talking about today. We're really going to be focusing on socials at TPE Onsite. What to do, how to do them, how to plan effectively, budgeting, and all that kind of good stuff. And so our next ED Live series is February 10th, so about 2 weeks from now, we'll be hosting another ED Live series. And then for employers.
Hey, Tim, can I chime in really quickly, since there have been a couple questions about shipping? So it will actually be online really quickly. We just approved the employer interview kit today with the decorator. Okay. So it'll just take them a little bit of time to put it on site. You then need to have your table number to both make any orders or shipment. And table numbers are also being assigned this week for those who are already in the system. So I think it's maybe on the employer dashboard, but starting February 3rd, should hopefully be when you'll start seeing that, if not by next Monday early in the week. And there will actually be able, for those of you who have come to TPE before, we are finally moving into 1997 and having online table orders for any additional things that you might need. If you need an additional chair, if you want a different type of chair, if you need a wastebasket, if you want to order power, all of those aspects you can now do online, as opposed to, I think in the past it was either calling or faxing. In that employer kit will also be all of the shipping labels, which will give you the date for both if you want to have them go in advance to the warehouse, or if you want them to go directly to the convention center, will depend on the date you ship. That will all be together in one packet. We've added a nice little hyperlinked piece to it. So hopefully it'll be up there early next week, and we'll send an employer message out to all employers with more information too.
Thanks, Kirsten. This is why we have her on the calls, because we sometimes don't know the answers. So that also segues into the last portion. So if you are registered as an employer and you need help, questions, or want to just talk with us one-on-one about different things, we are hosting concierge hours for employers. And so our concierge hours are listed here along with the links on how to sign up for like one-on-one times. And it'll be Zoom based. So it's not like you're going to call us. We will give you a Zoom link that you specifically need to go to like have our one-on-one time or answer any questions. And I didn't put it on here, but as always, should you have any questions via email, employers@theplacementexchange.org is an email address that you can continuously use as well. But should you want to take advantage of our concierge hours, we are more than happy to do so. If you are a California school, my concierge hours for Tuesdays are for my California schools who are doing the virtual TPE experience. So yeah, those are some of our just like outside of the call type of things that we want to make sure that our employers get that one-on-one attention should they need anything else. Arian, do you have any final thoughts, or does anyone have any final questions?
No final thoughts. Just really want to see if anyone has any questions about anything as it relates to scheduling or just being an employer with TPE in general. All right, if no questions, we greatly appreciate, oh, hold on. Never mind. We greatly appreciate you all coming to our webinar today. We hope you come to the next ones. But yeah.
Thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please let us know how we can make the experience awesome for you all at Onsite in a little over a month and a half. All right, have a great day.